Hello everyone and welcome to my guide on how to play a Brewmaster Monk in patch 8.1 in the battle for Azeroth. So if you're watching this guide, then you've either just started a Monk and want to know what it's all about tanking, or you're switching specs to Brewmaster and you want to know what talents to take and what the rotation looks like and so on. So first things first, the Monk was added in Mists of Pandaria and it is a leather wearing class. It is one of the most fun tanks to play in my opinion. I have got all different tanks and the Monk is the one that I'm sticking with. It's been really good in the latest raid, Battle of Dazar'alor, and I'm also pushing high keys with it, at least 10s, 11s, if not more, with the Monk as well. So it's really good. Not only do you bring a magic buff with you called Mystic Touch, which most raids or parties will want, you've also got your movement abilities, which just means you can torpedo all across the place and get to where you want. So they're also good for running old content as well. Another strength of them is with their stagger ability, which I'll come on to in just a bit. You are very good at taking large single hits as well. So in boss fights such as Fetid, for instance, in Uldir, Monks are brilliant. And again, against like Grong, for instance, in Battle of Dazar'alor, also very useful. So let's get on with it then, and let's have a look at the different talents available. So when you're looking at some of the talents that you can take, there are a few which I never change, and I'll tell you which ones they are, and there are some which I will change dependent on what type of boss you are up against, or if you are doing Mythic Plus, for instance. You can pick and choose some of them as you see fit, but there are some, like I say, which are generally pretty standard. So the first one then I use is Eye of the Tiger. Tiger Palm also applies Eye of the Tiger, dealing 2,892 nature damage to the enemy and the same amount of healing to you as well. This is one that I don't typically change. I've never found a need to, so I always stick with this one. Chi Torpedo. This will change your roll to a torpedo and it increases the amount to 2. This is something which I stick with most of the time, however you can change it depending on certain fights. It's really good. It increases your movement speed after you've torpedoed by 30% as well, and it does stack, and that lasts for 10 seconds. Okay, there's 2 general talents that you're going to pick and choose from in row 45. The first one, which I generally stick with, is Light Brewing, and it reduces the cooldown of your Iron Skin brew and Purifying brews by 3 seconds, and it increases the maximum number of charges by 1. I'm going to come on to the Iron Skin brew and Purifying brew in just a bit, but essentially what this does is it makes them last longer, and it gives you more to use, which makes it easier to keep them active at all times. The next talent which you may consider changing to is Black Ox Brew. It's on a 2-minute cooldown and it chugs some Black Ox Brew. It instantly refills your energy and all of your brews charges. Again, this is something that you may change to. It all depends on your style and what fight you're in. I typically stick with Light Brewing, like I say, but this is a good choice. So on to the next one then, row 60. You can choose between all 3 of these, but I typically choose between Summon Black Ox Statue, which puts a statue at the target location for 15 minutes, and what it does is it pulls threat to all the enemies around it within 20 yards. Now the great thing about this is if you taunt your own Black Ox Statue, then what it does is it taunts all the nearby enemies and puts all of the threat onto you. So for instance, this is very useful in the first boss fight in the new raid, so Frida. What I typically do is take this, I then drop this Black Ox Statue close to where the ads are spawning, and then I taunt onto this, and then all of the ads get pulled onto me. And I just find that it helps. Instead of having to taunt 3 times or run around collecting them all, you only need to taunt once if you place it correctly, and all the ads will just come onto you. The next one that I typically choose between is Ring of Peace, and what this does is it brings a ring around the target location for 5 seconds, and any enemies that walk towards it will be like bounced away. This is quite useful in certain scenarios. I use it in Conclave, for instance, And what I do is, if I can see either myself or a healer or somebody just being chased down by one of the raptors, you can drop a Ring of Peace. On opulence, when the ads spawn and they're starting to get a bit out of control, again you can drop one of the Ring of Pieces to keep bouncing the mobs back in so the DPS can cleave them down. On to row 75 then, and there's two that I typically change between, which is Bob and Weave, and it increases the duration of stagger by 3 seconds. Now, your stagger is what is specific to the monk, and what it does is it staggers the damage that you take over time. Now, what this does is increases the duration of your stagger, so obviously it gives you more opportunity to either clear it, which we'll come on to in just a minute, or it just smooths out the damage that you're taking over time. This is a talent which I do typically take if I'm not up against a boss that has like a big hitting ability. So again, the first boss in Battle of Dazar'alor, for instance, I would have this, and then I would change to Dampen Harm for Grong. What this does is it reduces all damage you take by 20 to 50% for 10 seconds, and the larger attacks are reduced more. So the bigger the attack, then the more likely you are to reduce that damage by 50%. Again, if you know that you're going to be coming across bosses or enemies that have an ability which can hit you quite hard, Grong is a great example, then Dampen Harm is a good choice for you. The one talent in row 90 which I use constantly and never change from is Rushing Jade Wind. It summons a whirling tornado around you, causing damage over 8 seconds to enemies within 8 yards. So it's a great way to keep threat on you at all times. I keep this up as much as possible. If it's ever on cooldown, I'm hitting the keybind to put it back up again in an AU type situation. It does damage, and like I said, it keeps the aggro on you as and when is needed. On the last row then, again, there are two typical talents that I choose from. The first one is Guard. It guards against future attacks, causing the next 104,000 damage delayed by stagger to instead be prevented. This is really, really useful. It's only on a 30-second cooldown, so you can use this multiple times in a fight. So a boss which I typically use this on, for instance, is Conclave. The fifth boss, I believe, in Battle of Dazar'alor. When you are tanking Kimball, when you're tanking Gonk, or any of the Conclave for that matter, because of how short this cooldown is, it is really, really useful. Again, Grong, a great boss fight to be taking this on. The other talent which I would find myself using, if I don't need to worry too much about damage, would be High Tolerance. It's a passive effect, and it makes your stagger 8% more effective at delaying damage. You gain up to 15% haste based on your current level of stagger. So the higher the amount of stagger you have, then the more amount of haste you are going to get. That is typically the only two talents that I choose between. So pick and choose them depending on which fight you are, but it's basically up to you. The ones that I would say are pretty standard: Eye of the Tiger, Chi Torpedo, Rushing Jade Wind, and potentially Light Brewing, but like I said, you can take Black Ox Brew if you want. So on to the abilities themselves then. Blackout Strike is an instant attack with a 3-second cooldown, and you hit the enemy with the blast of chi energy in melee range, dealing roughly 7,000 physical damage, and it generates a stack of elusive brawler. Breath of Fire is an AoE style attack, and it hits multiple targets in front of you, and it can be pretty specific with just how in front of you they need to be. I have found at times where I've thought an enemy is in front of me and it has missed them. The talent Chi Torpedo, which we've spoken about already. Crackling Jade Lightning causes 3,000 nature damage over 3 seconds to the target, and it sometimes knocks back melee attackers. You can use this to pull bosses, enemies if you want. I typically don't find myself using it that much. Dampen Harm, the talent we've already spoken about, if you've chosen this, otherwise you won't see this in your spellbook. Detox, it removes all poison and disease effects from the target, so that can be yourself or a friendly player. I keep this on a keybind so I can use it as soon as it comes off cooldown in certain Mythic Plus dungeons, such as Freehold for instance, or King's Rest. Expel harm. Draw in the positive chi of all of your healing spheres and expel a negative chi, damaging the nearest enemy for 10% of the amount healed. Now, as you are fighting, what you will see spawning all around you because of you being a monk, you'll get little yellow golden orbs appear around you. Now what you can do is you can use this to soak all of those. You don't need to run over them, it'll pull them all towards you and it heals you. I typically don't use this because it is a waste of energy, it costs 15 energy to use, and what you can just do as a monk, you can just run over those golden balls essentially, which heals you. So if you ever watch somebody tanking as a monk, you'll notice that they move from side to side. That's typically because they are collecting the orbs to heal them so they don't have to use the energy. So on to one of your first major defensive cooldowns then, which is Fortifying Brew. It turns your skin to stone for 15 seconds and it increases your current and maximum health by 20%, and it increases the effectiveness of stagger by 10% and reduces all damage you take by 20% as well. It is on a very long cooldown, but some of your abilities do reduce the cooldown, so it doesn't necessarily take 7 minutes for it to come back up again. Like I said, it's one of your first major cooldowns for defensives, and you should use this when you know that you are going to be taking massive amounts of damage, but your stagger's really, really high, and your healers are probably struggling. Guard is the talent that we've spoken about. If you haven't taken this, you won't see this. And then on to the first of the Iron Skin out of the brews. Iron Skin Brew, it's an instant use ability with an 11-second recharge, and like I said, that will reduce dependent on which abilities you are using, and you'll generate charges of Iron Skin Brew throughout the fight. And what it does is it staggers more damage, a lot more for 7 seconds. You want to keep this active at all times during the fight, and at first it's a bit tricky. You end up concentrating on your keeping this up and not concentrating on the fight essentially, but once you've worked out a rotation, you'll understand how long it's going to be available until Iron Skin Brew expires and when you need to press it again. And it is actually quite easy to make sure you've got 100% uptime of Iron Skin Brew. So keep this close to hand on one of your keybinds. Make sure you can see it. You can get a weak aura which will show you how long it's got left, but you want to be keeping this up as much as possible. Keg Smash, 40 energy on a 7-second cooldown, and what it does is it's one of the signature moves for the monk. It's where you see them throw a keg at the enemy. It deals damage to all enemies within 8 yards, and it reduces their movement speed, and it also reduces the remaining cooldown on your brews by 4 seconds. So this is what I was telling you about earlier on. Some of your abilities reduce the cooldown on your brews. Using this whilst it's off cooldown. 1 is key for aggro and damage, and 2 for reducing cooldown on your brews. Again, you want to keep this off cooldown, so as soon as it comes up you want to use this. Leg sweep is what we were talking about earlier on with that talent. You can extend the length, the range of this, and reduce the 1 minute cooldown. And what this does is you do a spinning kick and it knocks down all the enemies within 5 yards and stuns them. This is really, really good for if you need to interrupt multiple spells, if they're running away, if they have an ability which you need to use a stun to interrupt. Leg sweep is one that we have readily available. There is quite a large cooldown on it though, so it can be frustrating at times when you need to use it and you used it 40 seconds ago and it's still off cooldown. Paralysis, it is an instant ability with a 20-yard range and a 45-second cooldown, and this incapacitates the target for 1 minute. You can only do this on one mob, one enemy, and any damage will cancel the effect. So you'll have probably seen it where you've got like purple spikes coming out of enemies, and that's what this ability is. It's a great form of CC. You can use it cleverly on some of the trash packs in Battle of Tazaralor to skip them, and this is essentially the Monk's CC. Provoke or taunt. And what it does is it just taunts the enemy towards you, and it increases their movement speed by 50% as well. So same as most tanks, this is your standard taunt. So the third brew that monks have available to them is the Purifying Brew, and what it does is it clears 50% of your damage delayed with stagger, and what this does as well is it shares the charge with Iron Skin Brew. So if you have 4 charges of brews, you can use either Iron Skin Brew or Purifying Brew up to 4 times until you have to wait for the charge to regenerate. This is useful when you are taking really high amounts of stagger and your healer is either struggling to keep you alive or you just know that you need to reduce that as quickly as possible. And what it does, like I say, is it reduces it, it clears it by 50%. I typically don't use it that much in raids because I don't need to. The healers are capable of healing you through quite high amounts of stagger. What you will typically see, you'll get a little debuff when you've got stagger and it'll be green, yellow or red. When it gets to red, you may want to consider using this, but if your healers are confident and competent to keep you alive, you don't typically need to use it. Up to you. You'll get used to using your brews and managing them the more you tank with the monk. But like I say, high keys in Mythic and some really high amounts of stagger in raid is when I typically use Purifying Brew. Resuscitate speaks for itself. It brings dead friends back to life. We've already spoken about the Ring of Peace talent and the Russian Jade Wind, dependent on if you've taken those 2 talents. Spear Hand Strike is your interrupt on a 15-second cooldown, and it stops the spell from going off. Tiger Palm is an instant attack. It's something that you'll be using throughout the fight. You attack with the palm of your hand, dealing a small amount of damage, and again, this reduces the remaining cooldown on your brew, so you do want to be using this in the fight. Transcendence. This is a good defensive cooldown to use as well. You can also use it quite cleverly in certain fights. You can use it as well to reset bosses, for instance, as well. So King Rastakhan is a great example. If you use Transcendence before the fight, just outside of the door, it'll leave a little ghostly apparition of yourself floating around, and then what that allows you to do is move away. If you are going and taking King Rastakhan, for instance, and then you decide that you need to wipe it, what you can do is you can use Transcendence Transfer, and that will move you back to where you use the first ability, and if it's the other side of the door, you'll reset the boss. You can use this to move away from attacks that you know is going to really hurt taking them. So for instance, as a scenario that I can think of in the last boss in King's Rest, if not that you would because you're the tank, but if for some reason you got the heroic leap move done on you, you can use Transcendence to move out of the way of the jump before it hits you. Vivify is a heal. It heals you for 16,000, or you can use it on a friendly target. Another defensive cooldown, Zen Meditation. It reduces all damage you take by 60% for 8 seconds. If you move, if you're hit by a melee attack, or you do any other action, it will cancel this effect. So you literally just want to press it, wait for the channel, and if you take any damage, it will cancel the effect. But essentially, you want to use this just before a hard hitting ability because it will cancel that out, and then you can carry on as normal. Zen Pilgrimage returns you back to your departure. So you travel to your home temple, essentially, in Mists of Pandaria if you use this. And then if you use it again, it'll take you back to where you first used that ability. So on to your passives. Brewmaster Balance. Your armor is increased by 25%. Again, as a tank, this is a great thing. Celestial Fortune. You have a chance equal to your critical strike chance to be healed for an additional 65% of the amount healed. So what this does is the higher your critical strike rating that you get through equipping new gear and something gives you a chance to be healed for an additional 65% of any healing that you receive. So really useful. Gift of the Ox. So this is the passive that I was referring to with the little yellow golden orbs that you see spawning around you. When you take damage, you have a chance to summon a healing sphere visible only to you. And if you move through it, then it will heal you for 15,000. So like I said, you can either run across them, and they typically spawn to the side of you, so you can just sidestep, so you don't have to move out of the direction of the boss, or you can use the ability which brings all of those orbs to you. A Monk's Mastery then is Elusive Brawler. Each time you are hit by a melee attack or you hit with Blackout Strike, you gain 16.4% increased dodge chance until your next successful dodge, and it also increases your attack power by 16.4%, and it's a stacking buff this is, and as you can see, it goes up to 16% and you increase your dodge. As a tank, dodging is obviously a great thing, I don't need to explain that. And it also increases your DPS as well. So the raid and the party buff that people will want from a monk is this one. It's the Mystic Touch, and what it does is every time you attack the enemy, you weaken the target and then you increase its physical damage taken by 5%. So you keep hitting that boss to make sure that you're keeping this Mystic Touch debuff on the enemy so that you do increase people's damage. And then finally, Stagger, which is, like I said earlier on, it is what makes the monk so special. You shrug off attacks, delaying a portion of physical damage based on your agility. Instead, taking it over 10 seconds, and it affects magical attacks at 35% effectiveness. So the more agility you have, which is the main stat for a monk, the better this is for you. And like I said, what it does is it takes the damage that you take and then it will stagger that. And instead of taking it all in one go, it staggers it over 10 seconds, which means the damage that you take is a lot smoother and you are typically easier to heal. If you use your Purifying Brew, you can completely negate 50% of that stagger, meaning you don't actually take the full amount of damage. So, like I said, you need to keep Iron Skin Brew up 100%. You will have excess charges of brews. You don't think that to do that you need 4 charges. You don't. And you do have the opportunity to use Purifying Brew as and when you need it. Just don't spam your brews is my recommendation, because then you will go, they will be off charge and you'll have to wait and you won't have Iron Skin Brew up. Okay then, so moving on to stat priority for monks. The good news is it's pretty straightforward and the stats are really, really close in value. As a general rule of thumb, you just want to be equipping the highest eye level items that you can as a Brewmaster Monk. Agility is the stat that you focus on first and foremost. Like I said earlier on, it's the thing that increases the amount of stagger that you've got, and it helps your attack power as well. And it increases your dodge chance, so you want to be getting as much agility as possible. Now, with the rest of the stats, the only one that's not really equal in value is haste. So that's probably the one that you want to focus on least. Okay, so you don't need to worry about getting loads of haste gear. Critical Strike, Mastery and Versatility are pretty much equal. So if the gear's got them on, it's good for you. But like I said, you want to be taking the highest eye level possible. Other than that, look at Critical Strike, Mastery and Versatility. You don't need to worry about haste. In terms of enchanting, on your weapon, the best one to use really is Versatile Navigation. And for rings, you want to be using the Critical Strike enchant for rings. Go for the one that you can afford the most. There are 2 variants for it. There's a cheaper one and there's a more expensive one. It's not that expensive, so you might want to consider using the cheaper one if you are fairly low eye level. But once you get to around the 385, especially 400 mark, you want to be looking at the more expensive enchant for your rings. So let's have a look into the rotation then. The rotation's fairly simple once you get used to it, and you need to manage your energy so you can cast Keg Smash as soon as it comes off cooldown, which is 40 energy. So before the pull then, what you want to do, or what I do before the pull, and the opener you can do fairly differently on cooldown, is I will pop Rushing Jade Wind, and just as I'm running in, I will activate my Iron Skin Brew. I'll run towards it, throw a Keg Smash, and then use the fire ability Breath of Fire. And that is how I typically open on a fight. So, like I said, Rushing Jade Wind, Iron Skin Brew, Keg Smash, Fire, and then I go into my standard rotation of Blackout Strike, 2 Tiger Palms, which then means Blackout Strike is back up again, and Keg Smash is off cooldown. You typically find that once you do the second Keg Smash is when you want to use Iron Skin Brew again, because you are just about to run out of the uptime. So, Rushing Jade Wind, Keg Smash, Fire, Blackout Strike, 2 Tiger Palms, Blackout, Keg Smash, Iron Skin Brew, Rushing Jade Wind. And that is the rotation, essentially. The timings line up nicely, and you just go through that. And then every other Keg Smash, you should have Breath of Fire back up, off cooldown as well to use again. Very, very simple, very, very straightforward. There you go. You can see that I kept the brew active, and Breath of Fire is back up for the next time that you go round. You can see the little golden orbs, and if you just move from left to right, you can pick them up, and so on and so forth. If you do make a mistake in your rotation, it's not that big of an issue. Your main thing that you want to do is keep up your Iron Skin Brew, and everything else is fairly straightforward. Don't ever cast or use Tiger Palm more than twice, because you will not have enough energy to cast Keg Smash as soon as it comes off cooldown. Like I said, the Monk is a very, very fun class to play, and you can torpedo all over the place, and it's just a really cool class to play. They are one of the better tanks apparently at the moment in both Mythic Plus and the new raid. So if you're thinking about re-rolling one, I'd suggest do it, because it's really, really fun to play. So there you go, that is the Monk overview, the guide on how to tank as a Monk. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave them below in the comment section. Please like the video, subscribe if you'd like to. I am going to be doing more class guides over the next couple of weeks as I keep on leveling and gearing up all the different classes that I have. Thanks for watching.